will you learn today?
Today we will learn about verbal and visual elements of children's and adolescent literature.
What are verbal and visual elements of children's and adolescent literature, and how do they help bring a literary piece to life? These are the questions that we shall be answering in this video.
Verbal elements.
Verbal elements are components of literature that use words to help tell a story. Examples of these are as follows. The verbal elements of children and adolescent literature includes the following. Writer's purpose. What is the intention of the writer? Is it to inform, to educate, to entertain, to argue or protest, and etc.? Second, we also look at the plot of a literary text. Plot refers to the sequence of events in a story, or simply talks about the beginning, the middle, and the ending part of the story. And when we talk about plot, we talk about the narrative order. Did the author present the events in a story in a chronological manner? Which means to say, is it presented based on what happened first, second, third, last? Or did the author incorporate flashback, wherein there is a disruption in the storytelling because there are certain points in the story wherein the author presents something that has happened in the past? We also have the so-called flash forward. Events that are yet to happen are presented within the storyline to create anticipation among the readers. Conflict is yet another element that is part of plot. When we talk about conflict, this talks of tension between the characters, between and among the characters in a literary piece. The tension or the conflict can be in the form of man versus self, man versus man, or man versus him versus another character, man versus nature, and man versus God. Next, patterns of action. When we talk of patterns of action, we look at suspense, that state of uncertainty of how things will turn out. Suspense is what keeps us on the edge of our seats because we would like to know what would happen towards the end of a literary piece. Climax is the peak or turning point of the conflict in the story. And the denouement, which is simply the ending, is the point where conflicts are resolved. All these parts of the plot are very important in narrating a story, be it through prose or poetry, be it through musical play, drama, or even through a movie. Characters. Characters are the characters is yet another verbal element in any literary piece, and these includes people, animals, or objects that take part of or live out the story. They can be round characters. Those characters who are fully developed. They have their almost fixed personalities and characteristics, and they are very central to the story. Examples of which are your protagonist and your antagonist or your villain. However, not all the time are characters fixed by nature. Some of them change as the story unfolds. They are called dynamic characters. Even your protagonist and your antagonists can become dynamic characters too. And then you have the flat characters. They are less important, but still very much essential to the entire literary piece. The fourth verbal element is setting, the time and place where the story is set. And the setting can be either explicit, it's obvious, it is really stated in the literary piece, or it is implied. You get to know about the place and the time based on the description, based on the conversations or dialogue of characters, or based even on the description of the, let's say, fashion sense and the clothing of the characters, or the kind of vehicles they rode on, the description of the place, whether it has skyscrapers or it has a lot of trees and a lot of, let's say, small brick houses or nipa huts. All these will give us an idea of where the story was set. Number 5 is the theme. The theme is very important because it is the central idea of the literary text. It is the message that the author or poet or playwright would like to convey to its readers or audience. And then we also have style. Style in itself, or the so-called stylistic element, is in fact yet another element altogether. But simply put, style, which can be subsumed as part of verbal elements in a literary piece, refers to the choices that the writer or the author makes, such as what point of view to use, whether he or she will decide to narrate based on the first person perspective, wherein one of the characters narrate the story based on how he or she sees it, second person perspective, or even a third person perspective, wherein there is an outsider narrating, or the so-called narrator's point of view. The structure, the use of tenses, word choice, all these things are very important as they decide not only the tone of the story or of the literary piece, but they also create the overall mood of the entire literary piece.
Visual elements.
Visual elements, on the other hand, make use of images, lines, and pictures to narrate a story or to help readers understand a literary piece. Here are some examples. Take a look at these pictures. Pay attention to the wall on which Humpty Dumpty sits, and take a look at what you can find at the back. All those yellow, purple, blue, and red squiggles that seem to be emanating from the book. What about this? What do you think about those flashes of thunder and lightning and the big waves that are rocking the ship? These are another example of visual elements, or the first example of a visual element, which is the line. Now, the lines convey distance, as in the case of the wall in Humpty Dumpty. It creates movement, as in the case of the second picture, wherein the squiggly lines seem to be moving all over. Plus, it conveys emotions. How do you feel about the third picture? Does it make you feel scared? Does it make you feel shocked? Now, how would you feel if you were one of those passengers of this ship with the flashes of lightning, the very dark, heavy thunderclouds, plus the gigantic waves, which are symbolized by these literal waves of lines that paint a picture of a very tumultuous weather? Lines have the power of creating all these: distance, movement, and emotions. And illustrators do know very well when to use which particular lines and how. Another element of visual literature is best shown in these two pictures. Take a look at the colors that come into play in the first picture. Now juxtapose that with the second picture. Take a look at the hue, also known as the color appearance parameter. It tells us how similar or dissimilar a color is to a given color. For example, in the first picture, how yellow and how green are the colors of the leaves on this big tree. And take a look at the amount of light. Although the focal point in the first picture is a big colorful tree, you cannot help but draw your attention likewise to that at the back because of the amount of light that seems to appear from the back. It gives a feeling of mystery and wonder. Now compare that with the second picture. Assuming that this was exactly the same tree, or trees for that matter, the second picture gives us a sense of fear. It evokes not just fear, but probably also horror because of the absence of color and the minimum presence of light. Colors are artists' weapons, which can create a lot of emotions and which can set the mood for the story. Well, apart from that, you also have what you call saturation, which refers to the intensity or paleness of color. So all these are the considerations that illustrators have to make when they color in the images in any literary piece. And those colors, those decisions are oftentimes intentional because there is a look that they would like to achieve from their material. Number three, we have shapes and forms. Shapes and forms are geometrical or organic designs created by the meeting of lines, and they are used to highlight characters and objects in the story, as well as to add to the artistic appeal of the literary material. Now look at the different shapes that are used in the first picture. It creates a very unique look. The leaves surrounding Hansel and Gretel do look beautiful. Now compare that with the second picture, wherein you have all these characters of the Wizard of Oz. Very obvious are the shapes used in the Tin Man, wherein his face is really round, or shall we say, um, it is rectangular. You have rectangles, you have a funnel shaped head, you have a very round face for the scarecrow, and all other shapes help to bring about and define the characteristics of the different characters in this story. Now, by the way, when we talk of shapes, we talk about two-dimensional objects. And when we talk of forms, these are three-dimensional. Nonetheless, both shapes and forms are used by illustrators to create emotions, to evoke emotions, and to define the characteristics of certain objects or characters in the story. Number four, texture. This refers to the impression of how an object feels. Can you feel the hard shell of the tortoise in this picture? Now, what about the fluffy and hairy feel on the hair itself? Can you feel its ears, its body? Which do you think would you like to cuddle more? Would it be the tortoise or the hare? See, although we cannot physically touch these two animals, but the use of texture has made it appear to us as though the tortoise is really hard and scaly, while the hare is soft and cuddly. Now, what about this picture from Beowulf? Can you feel the muscles of the character? Can you feel the solid rock formation of this cave-like setting? Now, can you feel the sharpness of the fangs of this monster? All these are made possible because of the intelligent use of the element of texture. We now move forward to composition, and this refers to how objects are arranged in the picture or text in relation to the following: balance and symmetry, emphasis, movement, proportion and scale, pattern, repetition, and rhythm, as well as variety and unity. And we'll talk about each one in greater detail in the next few slides. First, let's talk about balance and symmetry. These involve mirroring of portions of an image to create a sense of stability, fortitude, and calm. One example of symmetry is what we call bilateral symmetry. So simply put, both sides of a picture are exactly the same. So if you would cover one part of this picture and would only have one part left, and then open up your hand to unveil the other half of the picture, you would notice that the two sides have the same elements. The entire picture is one example of bilateral symmetry. Now, another form of symmetry is what we call asymmetrical, as in the first picture of the hare and the tortoise, and radial symmetry. Now let's talk about asymmetrical symmetry first. Now take a look at the picture on your left. Although the hare and the tortoise picture is not an example of bilateral symmetry, the presence of the trees and the animals on the right side seems to give balance to the picture of the hare and the tortoise who are racing each other. So although there is no perfect symmetry, in fact, the picture shows asymmetrical symmetry, it still gives us a sense of balance in this picture. Now, this second picture of the mandala is an example of radial symmetry because the pictures are arranged in a manner that it seems to radiate from the center or form a circle. So if you can see, there is the impression of all these Buddhas rotating, circling the central figure, and that gives us a perfect example of radial symmetry. Emphasis is another component of composition, and this refers to highlighting objects or characters by means of foregrounding, use of color, lighting, and the like. Now take a look at this example of the cover of the book Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. Who do you think is being foregrounded here? You're right, it's Harry Potter, him being the main or central character in the story. Now take a look at this example of another book cover from The Little Prince. What is being foregrounded here? What is literally in front or in the foreground? Is it the prince? Or is it the big moon? Or is it a planet? Okay, although the little prince is not the biggest object in the picture, the use of colors that contrast each other. He is wearing all yellow, and his hair is even yellow, against a backdrop of blue with some yellow stars and planets. You can still see that it is a little prince, the character, which is being emphasized and not that which he is standing upon. Next, we also have movement, the use of visual elements to depict motion. Now take a look at this picture of the fall of Troy. Can you feel the movement here? Can you feel the physical movements of the different soldiers as they try to battle each other? Now take a look at the person falling because a soldier seemed to have slain him with the use of his sword. Now even the fire seems to be moving, being blown away by the wind into one particular direction. That is the power of movement as depicted in this picture. Now, this next picture from the Lorax by Dr. Seuss gives us a lot of examples of movement. What particular movements can you see here? Can you please write on the comment section? Now, moving forward, let's look at proportion and scale. This refers to the relationship of parts to the whole in terms of quantity, size, or value or hierarchy. This is a picture taken from the storybook The Rainbow Fish. Now take a look at how big the rainbow fish is compared to the other fish at the back. And the artist drew this page intentionally so to emphasize the rainbow fish herself. However, the presence of the seaweeds, which are right under or behind the rainbow fish, gives a sense of proportion to this picture. Next, this picture from C.S. Lewis's The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is an example of proportion because you see that Aslan, which is the central figure here, is flanked by the children plus the Snow Queen. So there is a sense of proportion, although the characters are emphasized quite differently, with the main character Aslan, of course, being placed at the middle of the picture. Pattern, repetition, and rhythm are yet another elements that fall under composition. And according to Mittman, they are referred to as the visual tempo created by repeating elements in a work of art. Now this picture from the legend of Mount Mayon shows the two main characters, Daragang Mayon and her lover. And take a look at all those swirling movements, all those patterns that seem to create one perfect picture of unity. You have the leaves that seem to match the hair of the two characters. You have all these patterns that just jive and that just melt. You have the leaves, the hair, even Mount Mayon, the clouds that also that can be found on top of Mount Mayon. They seem to complement everything else in the picture. And this is even made more attractive by the artist's use of pattern, repetition, and rhythm. Now this next picture from Alice in Wonderland shows a very obvious use of pattern, of repetition, and of rhythm. Now this clever use of these devices gives us the impression that the floor and even the columns are moving. That is one excellent use of the elements of pattern, repetition, and rhythm. It really does show the visual tempo created by the different elements of art here. Variety refers to the use of different visual elements, which gives it assortment. Unity, on the other hand, refers to the sense of harmony achieved when all parts of a text fit together. Now, in this example, we see both variety and unity. Because not all the time, or not all the time, are pictures that have varied elements chaotic. Because in this example, you can see this is actually an enlarged picture of the mandala. Remember the picture I showed you earlier of the different Buddhas? So this is one portion, 6 different Buddhas presented here. They are varied, but altogether they create a sense of unity. Because although they are different, take a look at their movements and their pose. They are different kinds of Buddha, but altogether they paint a picture of unity. Next, we have space. Another visual element that artists are so keen to use wisely is space, which is the area within or surrounding the visual text or artwork. This picture of Pinocchio placed inside a cage or a prison cell made of wood gives us the impression of actually being able to feel what it's like to be inside this prison. Now take a look at the space within Pinocchio's coop. Can you feel the space he has? It is the artist's rendition of the use of the different elements that gives us that feeling. And although we know that Pinocchio feels cramped, the presence of wide gaps in between the wood, um, shall we say, wood pillars or bars, also gives him just enough space to be able to move about. Space, very cleverly shown in this picture. Number 7 is illustration. These are graphic images or design that appear in literary texts. And oftentimes artists, again, think very carefully about what particular image or effect they would like to achieve through their illustrations. This picture of Juan Tamad, for example, is drawn in a caricature-like manner. You can see the elements or the characters or the objects here being defined by black borders, right? Compare that with this picture of a lady who seems to be on the beach. The first one looks so cartoon-like, the second looks surreal. Now, which do you think is intended for a younger audience? And which one is intended for the adolescent? Is it the first one? Is One Tamad intended for a younger audience? And is the second picture intended for adolescent audience or readers? You are right in saying so, because all these are calculated decisions and moves that artists come up with in order to achieve the look that they want that is consistent with the story and that is in consonance with what they would like to achieve with the target readers in mind. Number 8, you have text. This refers to writings on the pages of a literary material, and this always gets manifested or demonstrated very clearly through the choice of font styles, sizes, and colors. Now take a look at this green eggs and ham text. The letters seem to be very jiggly, and they are intentionally colored green, red, and yellow to appeal to a more immature and younger reader. Compare that with Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. The choice of font style, colors, all these help to bring about the intended effect, which is, again, in relation to what their readers would most probably find attractive and in relation to how the story or in relation to how they would like to reflect the story. Now, this next picture of the Diary of a Wimpy Kid shows us the use of font style that is best paired, that best reflects the comic strip style of writing of the material. Compare that with this next story. You have A Dog Has Nice Ears by Lauren Child, and you see that the use of text and the positioning of the different words are intended for a purpose.
Reflection. How does one's knowledge of verbal elements help him or her understand and appreciate a literary piece?
And that's what we learned for today. Thanks for watching and see you in the next learning session.